welcome back to the program. First off, it's been too long since we've talked. You've done some just remarkable work. Craig Unger, by the way, also has a Substack newsletter. Craig Unger, spelled just like you sound, CRAIGUNGER.substack.com, which is free and really, really worth signing up for. Craig, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Always an honor and a pleasure here, Craig. You published this piece. I'd like to start with this. This is kind of well, actually, let me start with your take on what the Congressman Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie. Ro Khanna is a regular on our program. He's vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Thomas Massie, of course, a right-wing, MAGA guy, but he's willing to bring these young women to Congress tomorrow. Tell us about this and your take on how this is going to play out.
Well, I think there are a lot of questions about Epstein that have not been answered. And, horrifying as all the sex trafficking is and the abuse of minors is, I think there are many more questions that actually may be even more important. And one thing that I've been looking into is there were two Russian women working for Epstein. One was Masha Drukova, another was a woman named Lana Pozadayeva. And it's quite interesting because when you go do a deep dive into their backgrounds, it's very clear they have very serious connections to Russian intelligence. And if you understand that Vladimir Putin really wanted to penetrate Silicon Valley, he really began to understand how important artificial intelligence is, and he would like nothing more than to have operatives in that world who are reporting back to Russia. So I started looking into these two women, and I'll be reporting more on them into the future. So I don't want to get ahead of it, but Epstein had a huge operation. It was not just sex trafficking. There was enormous amounts of money laundering going on and a huge number of offshore transactions.
I've read reports that Donald Trump was involved in literally millions or maybe even billions of dollars worth of transactions, wire transfers with Jeffrey Epstein. Are those accurate?
Yes, Trump, I think at one point I had the figure of $1.5 billion of money laundering went through Trump real estate. And the thing with real estate regulations is they're very, very lax. So it's very easy to launder money through real estate. All you need to do is put together a limited liability company, which is very, very simple. It only costs maybe a couple $100. Anyone can do it. And you call it the XYZ Corporation and make it anonymous, and then you make an all-cash transaction, so nothing has to go through the banks. If that happens, and it happened a lot with Donald Trump, in effect, any party can launder money through real estate. And as early as 1984, I was able to document a man named David Bogadin, who was linked to the Russian mafia, came into Trump Tower. Trump Tower in Midtown Manhattan had just opened the previous year, and Bogadin put down $6 million in cash and said he'd take 5 condos. That, by the way, that's the equivalent of about $30 million today. So it's as simple as that to launder money. And the Russian mafia and affiliate, it's important to understand also that the Russian mafia is really an arm of Russian intelligence. They're not at odds with it in the way the American mafia was with the FBI. They are part of Russian intelligence. So to me, this is just an enormously grave breach of national security.
Sort of like the U.S. FBI and the mafia pre-1961. When Richard Nixon was kind of in bed with the mob and trying to blow up what's his name, Castro in 1959. Interesting. So, you're one of the most definitive, most competent, in my mind, biographers of Donald Trump and
Thank you.
What he's been doing all these years. You're the guy who takes us back to the 1980s when Trump first went over to Russia and and was apparently seduced by the KGB along with his wife Ivana, whose father was a KGB informant. To what extent do you think, and what evidence would you offer to back it up, if you think, that Donald Trump is still serving the interests of Vladimir Putin directly, as opposed to just, sharing a philosophical love of strongman autocracy?
Right. Well, on some level, it's incredibly simple. I mean, if you look at his so-called plans to end the war in Ukraine, he's meeting alone with Vladimir Putin. Zelensky isn't there. I mean, that in a way, that's all you need to know. I mean, and he keeps blaming the invasion on Zelensky, which is very, very weird. We know for factual reality, and that didn't happen. And he has not been cracking down on Russia. To me, it's as simple as that in a way. I think, unfortunately, you have to rely on a lot of circumstantial evidence, but there is enormous amounts of circumstantial evidence. And that's why I go all the way back to 1980 when Trump had his first ties to Russian intelligence. And he had built his first, one of his few genuine successes, which is now the Grand Hyatt Hotel in New York next to Grand Central Station. And Trump was redeveloping it. And like any hotel, it needed television sets for every hotel room. And you would think a big outfit like Hyatt, you would go to Samsung or Sony or a major vendor like that. But instead, Donald Trump went to a small electronics store called the Joy Ludd Electronics that was owned by a man named Semyon Kislin. And in American Compromise, I was able to go back and trace Kislin's history and show how all of his ties to Russian intelligence, actually Soviet intelligence, because this goes back to 1980 when the KGB was very much active. And those ties have continued on and on. Trump at one point was more than $4 billion in debt. He had filed for 6 bankruptcies, and it was the Russian mafia that came to bail him out again and again and again. And they've said it quite forthrightly. We've seen all this money pouring into us from Russia. That's all we need.
Yeah, that was Don Jr.'s quote, wasn't it? And
yeah.
Eric Trump said pretty much the same thing, as I recall.
Right.
So to my question, is Trump, do they own him? Is he afraid of them? Is he hopeful of a $1 billion Trump Tower in Moscow? Does Putin have compromise on him? I mean, why would he betray his own country and certainly democracy in favor of this tin pot dictator?
Well, check, all of the above in a way, because they do own him. And I mean, think of it. If you were bailed out, if you were $4 billion in debt and you were bailed out by someone who was laundering all this money through you and was giving you these projects, I mean, some of them are rather convoluted, but he made a fortune from Russian sources. So they do own him. It's also, there's no... There's a lot of reason to believe there is compromise on him. First, I think it's pretty clear they do in terms of financial transactions. That is, if you look at a firm like Bayrock, which has lots of ties, I document, to Russian intelligence, he was doing franchising deals with them, and they have all the financial data because they did several projects, all of which ended up failing. There was Trump Soho, which failed and had to change its name to it's now the Dominic, I believe. There was a Toronto Trump Towers that was also tied to Russian intelligence, and it's now the St. Regis Hotel. So you have half a dozen major towers all over the world that were essentially franchise deals from which Trump made millions and millions of dollars. And you just got to think, if someone keeps giving you millions and millions of dollars, you're going to be pretty nice to them. I think it's as simple as that. And then there are, as well, in terms of sexual compromise, I've never seen things actually fully corroborated. I have had one source here and there off the record giving me accounts which are believable but not confirmed.
Craig, can you stick around for a little bit? This is all too familiar to me. You wake up with a scratchy throat, congestion, runny nose, and cough. You know your body. You know you're getting sick, right? Well, what are your choices? Tough it out, get sick, and take time off work? Hope the doctor can see you this month? Wait 2 hours at urgent care and have people cough all over you? Or open your medical emergency kit like mine. I just match my symptoms to the doctor-recommended prescription, start at the right meds, and nip this thing in the bud right now. This is not a first aid kit. It comes with doctor-prescribed meds to treat dozens of common and serious medical issues. Strong antibiotics for infections of all types, strep throat, pneumonia, UTIs, bronchitis, and a lot more. Plus, a doctor's easy guide so you'll know exactly what to take and when. No waiting to see the doctor, no waiting at the pharmacy. My meds are in my kit. Every home should have at least one medical emergency kit. You can get $35 off at urgentcarekit.com/Tom, Tom, when you check out. That's promo code Tom at urgentcarekit.com/Tom. So we were talking, Craig, about sexual compromise, and we hit the break, and it kind of blew up your train of thought there. You want to finish?
Right. Well, I've never seen something actually corroborated, but there's been so much talk about it, and the Russians are famous for capturing people in hotel rooms. All their hotel rooms have hidden cameras. Their strip clubs have hidden cameras, and there have been consistent reports of this through the years. I mean, I think the first one sort of blew up in everyone's faces. The ones that came from Christopher Steele and the so-called P tapes. And I want to put those to a side because I think one of the things with disinformation is sometimes people put out false stories to discredit something that may actually be true. So we're left with in a position that's very unsatisfying where you have things that may be true, but they have not been actually confirmed. It's just if you know Donald Trump, a lot of it is quite believable.
Yeah. What about Trump's activities with Jeffrey Epstein all those years? Were the Russians in the middle of any of that? Might that be the kind of compromise that they have?
Well, that's one of the things I'm sort of investigating now, and I hope to get to more later, is, as I just said in the earlier segment, there were two women there, Masha Dukova and Lana Pozodaeva, who were Russians who were working for Epstein. And there was another woman named Anna Malova who appeared to have had a relationship, possibly with both Trump and with Epstein, and she was living in a Trump Tower apartment for some time. I'm looking into others as well. So it seems to me that the Epstein operation, I mean, it's very weird when you look at it, but if you were in the intelligence world, if you were a spy and you saw Jeffrey Epstein from afar, you might say, wow, I've got to get in there. He's got everything going for him. He's got money laundering. He's got sex trafficking. He's got sexual compromise. Epstein's operation was a factory for potential compromise, and it's never been fully tracked down. I was approached by a man who had been deputy sheriff in Palm Beach County. His name was John Mark Dugan. And I had long interviews with him in which he said he was there as the Palm Beach Sheriff Department began investigating Jeffrey Epstein. I think it was around 2005. And a fellow member of the sheriff's department gave him 478 tapes. Now, this man was probably lying, but I think this is one of those.
Is this the guy who went to Moscow?
Exactly.
He defected.
He called me from Moscow. I mean, we called back and forth from Moscow, but he was there with a man named Pavel Borodin, who is a high-level Putin official, and he took a photo together and pasted it on his Facebook page as if to say, look, I've got all this compromise and I'm handing it over to Russia.
Amazing. Epstein was working with Mossad, and I don't know to what extent that's just anti-Semitic crap because Epstein was Jewish, or if he really was, or that he was working with the KGB or the FSB, I guess it's called now. Is it possible that Epstein could have amassed this multi-billion-dollar fortune just purely on basically blackmailing, wealthy men, or was there a foreign connection to this? And do you think that that's going to be coming out?
Back to the late 80s and early 90s, one of my sources, an Israeli spy named Ari Ben-Menashe, says Ben Menashe was working with Robert Maxwell, the great press baron, who's the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, and that he told me that Jeffrey Epstein was working with Robert Maxwell at the time. And Robert Maxwell, and I documented this in some of my books, was very, very closely tied to the KGB, and he was also tied to Mossad. So he had this sort of dual or triple allegiance, and Epstein appears to have been part of it. The question was, to what extent was Epstein really part of it, or was he just appearing in Maxwell's office one day, or was it more than that? And I don't know the answer to that yet. Yeah. But you do have in Epstein's operation, I mentioned those two women spies, and there were Israelis, Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel, who had been also head of the Defense Department in Israel, was there a lot. So yes, with Epstein, and that's a real question. And I think when you start looking at the world of technology, and the Russian women I mentioned have moved on to Silicon Valley, and when you know that Vladimir Putin was and is very much obsessed with artificial intelligence and wanting to penetrate the American scientists who are leaders in.
So are you saying that these two women you just wrote about, share and share alike, over at craigunger.substack.com, that these two women who Epstein and Trump basically brought to the United States, put up in apartments at Trump Tower, that they're now in Silicon Valley, and that these are what, Mata Haris? These are spies using their sexuality?
Well, that's one thing I'm pursuing. There's no question they have backgrounds in intelligence. Lana Pozadayeva started out with a brilliant academic career. Her academic career was essentially the equivalent of having a summa cum laude at Harvard and a doctorate from Georgetown or Stanford. She was clearly moving into the foreign ministry or perhaps the world of intelligence. And then she did a quick 180 and started hanging out with Jean-Luc Brunel. She became a model for his modeling agency, and he was also involved in sex trafficking with Epstein. So why would she do such an abrupt switch in her career? Similarly, Masha Dakova was known as the girl who kissed Putin. She was in Russia when she was 15 years old. She was one of the leaders of Nashi, which was sort of the Russian equivalent of Hitler Youth. I mean, and she ran up and kissed Putin on stage, and now she's over here and is in Silicon Valley with a lot as a venture capitalist.
Amazing stuff.
A lot of startups.
Craig, I'm sorry I'm out of time here, but Craig Unger, craigunger.substack.com. Hang on just a second, Craig. We're going to.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Craig, as always, it's such a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you so much for dropping by.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here.